Welcome back to another episode of the Hubscale Podcast, where we interview the brightest minds in security. Today we have Belsasar, the CEO and founder of identity security startup Cerby. Belsasar, welcome.
Nathan, thank you so much. Brightest, I don't know. You're setting the bar kind of high, but we'll see what we can do.
Awesome. Thanks for joining anyway. Just so the audience know, please introduce yourself, give us a brief overview of your background and a summary of how you got to where you are today.
Yes, absolutely. Well, my name is Bell, which is short for Belsasar. I am the CEO and one of the co-founders here at Cerby. Kind of quick background on Cerby. We are an identity automation company. We focus on solving the problem of really automating security tasks that today really rely on human intervention. So it's everything from, a lot of password-based applications out there still rely on human users to rotate passwords, enroll MFA, or, for example, to remove users who are no longer part of the business. The Cerby system takes an agentic approach to be able to automate away that dependency on the end users. And so I believe we'll talk a little bit more about that over the course of this podcast, but it's kind of a quick primer on Cerby. As it relates to my background, I'm a second-time founder. My first company was actually outside of the cybersecurity space. That was a company that we grew and then eventually exited in 2014. Before that, I was a engineer at Google, and I'm now, I would say, entering the 21st year of my professional career. So I've had the good fortune to be able to work across a variety of different industries and tackle some really interesting problems.
Awesome. Talk to me about the early days then, when you mentioned you started off at Google just after the '04 IPO. What was it like being a software engineer at such a high growth company back in the mid 2000s?
It was a lot of fun, and to this day, I would say that I have not necessarily experienced another situation like that. One of the fascinating things about Google at the time, by the way, I was employee like 10,000, so it was a big company, not as big as it is today. It's 150,000 employees, I believe. But it always there's so many smart people, I would say, and just it's such an interesting environment to be in, because when you have that many smart people and just the volume of problems to solve is just so vast. It's, there's no politics. Everyone's just focused on doing great work and working with one another. It was an absolute joy, frankly, working there. I'd also mention I started working there when I was 18, so I started working there before I actually even enrolled at Stanford, and so it really helped shape how I see, what the corporate world can look like. And 3 months after starting working at Google, I actually started going to school at Stanford, and at the time, it continues to be the case still, but at the time, the ties between Stanford and Google were especially close, and so there was this dynamic where my coworkers were also my professors at Stanford, and so I got to really enmesh myself in just not only the theoretical side of computer science, but the practical side. And so I always really appreciated that juxtaposition of, the theory I was learning at Stanford and just like the very practical way that Google would go about solving things. And so, I did that for about 2 years, and it was just a really, really fun time early on in my career.
Yeah, what a great place to start, right? And talk to me about the transition, because then after 2 years at Google, started your first venture. What were some of the challenges going from an absolute giant like Google to starting your own business with little to no support? And what were some of the things you really enjoyed about that transition too?
Absolutely. So in 2007, I left Google along with two fellow Googlers. One of them is my brother, Bismarck, and it's always it doesn't work for everybody, but in our case, working together was fantastic. And then third co-founder, Sean Knapp, who's a close friend and one of the most wonderful people I've had the good fortune to know and work with. And so in 2007, we left to found a business. And Sean, the third co-founder, actually had this wonderful expression, which is, going and building a company of your own is a lot like, you know, owning your own apartment, and even if, moving out and owning your own apartment, and even if, your parents owned a mansion and, working at Google was like having a room in that mansion, there's something just very fulfilling about having something that is your own and that you're building and you're self-sufficient. And so that's very much what it felt like leaving the mothership back in what would have been 2005. Google was the shining example of just a company that cares about its employees, and you had a lot of perks. And we left that to go and start something that had no perks, right? The first 8 months of our existence at Ooyala, which was the name of the first company, we basically lived in the office. We didn't leave the office. We ate, slept, and worked there because we wanted to get our MVP out. And so it was fun, but a lot of the contacts, a lot of what we learned at Google really set us up for what we eventually ended up doing as part of Ooyala. And so it was a sharp contrast, but I would definitely think of it as a continuum because again, what we learned at Google, we were able to push forward to what we did at Ooyala.
Awesome. What were some of the main highlights and success stories of Ooyala across that 12-year run you had?
12 years is a long time, and I would say there were a lot of different chapters. The first chapter was really the first 2 years in which the Great Recession 2008 hit, and so that was kind of a unique time in the company's history, just because we got funded, then the Great Recession hit, and we hit some headwinds there in terms of even though we were a well-funded business. Um, People didn't want to come and work for a company that didn't have the perceived stability of a Google, of a Microsoft, so on and so forth. And so that was kind of a chapter that was interesting. And then in 2009, we brought on a professional CEO, Jay Fulcher, who to this day continues to be a great supporter and someone that, the founders, we count ourselves as very fortunate to have been able to work with him. And, really from 2009 to 2014 was this meteoric growth curve. We signed, seven-figure dollar deals with folks like ESPN and Univision, and we eventually sold the company in 2014 to Telstra. Was a good sized exit. And one of the key things I learned there, really from Bismarck and Sean and Jay, was that you can spend as much time as you want on the product, but a lot of success actually ultimately has to do with the team that you assemble. And so, one of the lessons we've pushed forward here at Cerby is everything begins with the team, right? You need to build the team that builds the product that customers love, and if you focus on that, then you're going to have great success. And then the final chapter was really 2014 to 2019, and that was learning how to operate under an acquiring company, in this case, Telstra. Telstra was actually a very good parent company, but they were a telecommunications company. And, eventually I would say they realized that they were a telco, not necessarily a media technology company, at least in the sense of what we were. And we actually eventually ended up buying the business back from Telstra and sold it for a second time. And so those were three very discrete chapters, I would say, and learned something very different from each of those three chapters at Ooyala.
It's really, really interesting the fact that you sold, bought back, and sold again. That's pretty unique, and not often that I speak to people who have been through that pretty unique situation. And then 2019 comes in, obviously, you create Cerby alongside your co-founder, Vidal. Why did you create Cerby in the end? What was the reason why you ended up going out there and creating this business?
It's something of an interesting story there as well. Vidal and I do not come from the cybersecurity space, but as a consequence of our prior company, so I'm a second-time founder. Vidal's a third-time founder. He's also very successful as a founder, and generally also count myself as fortunate to be able to work with him. His last company was a company by the name of Wiseline, which he co-founded actually with my brother. So there's a lot of once you find people that you work well with, you kind of lean into it. But the long story short, there is we actually had a prior customer approach us about the problem that we solve, and the story there is that they had found that they had a domain of applications that were highly susceptible to breach by malicious third parties. And so it was them that approached us and said, "Hey, we have this problem. We've gone and spoke to all of the incumbents, and they've all basically said, 'Hey, this is not our focus. It's actually a very hard problem to solve. Good luck trying to go and solve it.'" In fact, one party actually said to them, "It's cheaper to get hacked than to try to solve this problem." And so this customer that we'd been able to work with at our prior companies basically approached us and said, "If you can solve this problem, if you can build it, we will buy it." And having been a founder before at that point in time, we know how powerful it is when a customer approaches you and says, "This is a big enough problem that we will pay to solve it." But we didn't take it, on faith. We went out, we did some independent validation. We probably spoke to just under 100 CIOs and CISOs, and they all validated and backed that, hey, this is a big problem. We have applications today that sit outside of the identity perimeter, and we have no way to be able to bring them back under the management of systems like Okta, Microsoft Entra ID, SailPoint, Savient. And so with that understanding in mind and just kind of very firm conviction, we set out to build the business formally in 2020.
I really like your point there, where you said that a CIO or a CISO said it's cheaper to get hacked than it is to solve this problem, and then yourself and Vidal clearly thought, no, it's not. We're gonna come up with a unique solution. That's awesome. Enlighten me on what the first 12 months of Cerby looked like when you were in that pre-seed stage. What were the first 12 months of the business like? What were the goals? What were the objectives?
The nature of the problem that we solve is basically dealing with a substantial amount of heterogeneity because we're dealing with applications that don't support standards. And as a consequence, every application is effectively its own standard. And so the first 12 months was really about recruiting design partners and iterating as much as possible on, all right, what's the first flavor of this problem that we want to go and solve? And so we were very fortunate to be able to recruit design partners like Colgate and L'Oreal and Dentsu. I mean, just really fantastic Mattel, partners. And so we started working with them early on, and they played a material role in shaping not only our platform, but the first couple of use cases. And so the first 12 months were, again, recruiting the design partners and iterating on what was the version of this problem that we wanted to solve.
Interesting. And then talk to me about that middle section, I guess the next 2 years or so, where you started picking up a bit of traction, you started signing some impressive customers, you raised that 12 million seed, the 17 million A. Talk to me about that period in time within the business.
So in that next phase, the focus was on converting the design partners into paying partners, and we were able to do that very successfully, basically in that span of time from seed to Series A. One of the dynamics that I would say we probably didn't anticipate at the time, but now we have a very deep appreciation for is one way to think about Cerby is that we're a very integrations heavy business, which is to say that the more integrations we have, the more the higher the value is that we're able to deliver for our customers. And so, when our first use case was actually focused on the marketing stack, specifically social media. It was very fast to get to a high level of coverage across that application family. But as we started to branch out into other use case families, we realized, my goodness, there are 17,000 applications that that we could integrate with. And so we started to come up against this dynamic of we needed to have a certain number of integrations for the value of the platform to really resonate. And someone told me this once. I don't know if the founding MuleSoft CEO actually said this, but I repeat this quite a bit. But if you're an integrations heavy business, this is the dynamic you encounter, which is, having 50% of the integrations you need gets you 0 million in revenue. But getting to 90% of the integrations you need gets you to your first 1 million in revenue. And so, seed and Series A was not just about converting our design partners, but getting to the necessary volume of integration so that we could start to monetize all of the investment we'd made into that platform. And again, it's having gone through that process, it's easy to understand what the journey was in retrospect. But when we were in that journey, we didn't really have a good understanding of, hey, what's the number? How many integrations do we need to get to before we can just approach anybody and monetize them as a customer?
How would you say your product has developed over the last 5, 6 years then from those initial conversations with CISOs, CIOs, developing the products up until now? How would you say it's advanced, it's developed?
In a number of ways, we're now a 5-year-old company, and so as you'd imagine, the surface area that we help manage and that we help protect has grown considerably. But probably the element that I would call out there that I continue to find as most fascinating is that as a security product, we are more on the unique side. I won't say truly unique, but more on the unique side in the sense that we tackle a domain of applications that historically has been managed by the line of business owner. And that means that these are typically applications that sit well outside the purview of an IT security team. But the budget for Cerby usually comes from an IT security team. And so you end up in the situation where we have two very contrasting sets of user groups. You've got your traditional buyer of IT security products, IT security, but then you've got your line of business owners who are the ones, again, who up until now, up until they started using Cerby, would be the ones responsible for administrating those applications. And different from another security product, there isn't a hierarchy of, IT security runs the product and then the line of business owner is a user of it. No, they're both power users in our platform. And so one of the things that we've really had to balance in our platform is the somewhat opposing needs of both groups. IT security, for example, has a certain perspective on what they expect from a security product, everything down to what they expect the user experience to be, right? A lot of dark mode, a lot of data, a lot of graphs, and just really focused on security and remediation. Whereas the line of business owner, they don't frankly necessarily care about security. They care about productivity. They care about security not being an impediment to what they're doing on a regular basis. And so, over the last 5 years, we've really tried to balance the sometimes opposing needs of both groups. And I wouldn't say we've nailed it, but we've certainly gotten progressively better at maintaining that balance.
Awesome. So we talked about the last 5 years with Cerby, all of the challenges and success stories so far. What do the next 12, 18 months look like for you guys? What are some of your ambitious goals that you have?
Absolutely. So, at the time of recording this podcast, we're a few weeks out from closing our Series B round of funding, which was led by DTCP. It was a $40 million Series B round. We're super excited to be working with DTCP. As part of that round, we also brought on, or I should say, we also continue to work with existing investors, including Two Sigma Ventures, Salesforce Ventures, Okta Ventures, Bowery Capital, Founders Fund, Ridge Ventures. I'm very sorry if I didn't list an investor, Aviate. So we had full participation from all of our major investors. And but to answer your question, it's really on expansion, right? Post Series A, we were very focused on demonstrating not only our product market fit, but that we had the beginning part of a repeatable sales motion. And so now in Series B, it's about scaling that up. And so that means hiring more account executives, investing more into marketing, starting to develop a partner motion. We're very unique as a identity product because we don't replace, we augment. And so there are natural synergies there that we have with investors and partners like Okta, who's an investor, partners like Microsoft, for instance, Savient as well. And then the final part is geographic expansion. One of the reasons why we are partnering with DTCP is they have not only a great footprint here in the United States, but also in EMEA. And so there's also a concerted effort that we're making over the next 18 months to really establish an additional presence in EMEA and grow on the back of some of the customers we've already got there. For example, we've got L'Oreal as a customer who's really a temple customer for us in that region and globally, but especially in that region.
Yeah, you've signed some interesting partners in the UK and Europe from our last discussions. I remember. Talk to me about what your European expansion goals look like, because a lot of US vendors step into EMEA quite early. Sometimes they wait to maybe Series C or D. Talk to me about that because obviously it's a little bit of a minefield, isn't it? Going from US, very similar culture, then selling to maybe the UK, France, Germany, completely different culture across these different language speaking countries. So enlighten me on that.
That is a very great assessment. You know, selling here in the U.S., it is more homogenous, especially from a regulatory framework, and more or less single language, et cetera. And so as you go into EMEA, it's 30 plus effectively different markets, give or take. And so um, that is certainly complexity that we need to deal with. And one of the ways that we're approaching that is through partnerships, finding partners that can really be our front line of support of sales, pre-sales and post-sales. And so that's key to scaling and going into EMEA, leveraging folks that are very familiar with the market. But in terms of a tailwind, something that we're very excited about is we tend to do very well when we are selling into environments that have regulation. And if we're being very honest here, the regulatory frameworks in EMEA are actually more strict and in some cases more rigorous than when you find in the United
Absolutely.
States. And so that's actually something that works very well for us because anytime you're dealing with a company in a highly regulated industry, chances are they will have requirements around managing what we call disconnected applications. And because the regulatory frameworks exist, they will have to have a solution, often manual, to solve this problem of, running operations like password rotation, et cetera. And so one of the key reasons why we're actually very excited about EMEA is you have this regulatory framework, you have this compelling framework that requires users to actually be aware of this problem. And so our ability to quantify our value is actually higher because we can say, hey, you're subject to this regulatory framework. We know that you're spending a lot of money on salary dollars to stay in compliance through manual workflows. We can come in and automate those. And so when we weighed the kind of cost benefit, the benefit of going into EMEA, given that regulatory framework, just was to us very obvious.
It's interesting, isn't it? There are quite a lot of software vendors out there who seem to perform very well in highly regulated industries. I've supported Cyera grow when they were in their Series A phase, and they very much sold into similar highly regulated industries too. It's awesome to hear. Why would a go-to-market professional or even someone technical, whether that's someone in the US where you already have a base or in Europe in this next phase of expansion, why would they be interested about the prospect of joining Cerby, whether that's this year or maybe later down the line, a couple of months later?
Number of reasons, and obviously I'm biased in saying that. First and foremost, we're solving a very interesting problem, and we're solving it in somewhat of a contrarian sort of way. Core to the thesis you could argue of Serby is that standards won't necessarily ever achieve 100% penetration, right? Because again, what we're talking about is we're dealing with applications that are still password based. It could be legacy mainframes that were built in the 80s, 70s. And so what we're saying is that problem is never going to go away entirely. And who doesn't like to be a contrarian and who doesn't like to be using the latest technologies to solve those problems? So I think that's one aspect of this, that it's a very interesting, very fascinating problem. Another is that we've been very successful. When you see the companies that we've been able to enroll on our platform, these are remarkable partners and customers that we count ourselves lucky to be working with. Again, folks like Fox, Dentsu, L'Oreal, dominant global brands. And so it's rare that you see at the time, Series A, now Series B company that's been able to attract and work with customers, many of whom are Fortune 2000. And then the third and final component is we're very team focused. We know that all of our success comes from having hired the right people. And, guiding philosophy for us when we grow our team is hire someone who's better than you at at least at one thing. And so we're constantly looking to make the team better. And so, we've grown well. We're at 100 plus customers. We've basically 5x the number of customers, 3x the number of amount of revenue since our last round of funding. And so we're in a very good place. We're growing well, and we're looking to bring on other folks that want to be part of that success journey.
Awesome stuff. Well, I know I'm very excited to see how the next 12, 24 months play out for you guys. Belsasar, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast. We'll have to do it again in maybe another year or so, see where you guys are up to then.
Sounds like a plan. Nathan, thank you so much.